BibleWorm, reading the Bible with BibleWorm.
Welcome to BibleWorm, getting to the core of the biblical text. I'm Dr. Robert Williamson, professor of religious studies at Hendrix College and theologian in residence of Canvas Community in Little Rock, Arkansas.
And I'm Dr. Amy Robertson, Director of Lifelong Learning and Music at Congregation Or Hadash in Sandy Springs, Georgia. We're here every week to discuss the biblical text, both as biblical scholars and as people of faith, one Jewish, one Christian.
This week we conclude our summer series on creation with Ezekiel's vision of a river of life flowing from the temple, as told in Ezekiel 47, 1 through 12. The prophet Ezekiel, writing from the devastation of the Babylonian exile, envisions a radical recreation of the world that takes place when God's glory returns to the Jerusalem temple. What begins as a tiny trickle of water emerging from under the altar becomes a mighty river that turns even the Dead Sea into a thriving ecosystem teeming with fish. Along the river's banks grow fruit-bearing trees with healing leaves, transforming the desolate land of exilic Israel into a new Eden where both humans and the environment can thrive. What would happen, we wonder, if our communities of faith also became sources of God's life-giving water for the world? How might our desolate lands be transformed if we boldly proclaimed the glory of God in relationship with creation? It doesn't seem like much, we think, but even Ezekiel's raging river of life began as a tiny trickle. What if our efforts could do the same? Thanks for joining us. Amy, it's the last BibleWorm of season 5. Can you believe it?
It is. I sort of can believe it, and it's sort of nice to have a break coming up, but also sort of sad.
It is. And I was thinking about that today. I was like, after we record today, I might not really see you for like a couple of months.
I know. What if I look totally different? Like, what if that is going to be my goal, that the next time you see me, I am unrecognizable to you?
Have some sort of transformation.
Yeah,
that would be amazing. Like purple hair.
My first thought when you said transformation was, I'm going to turn into a bird.
That would be amazing, like King Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel 4. Chirpy, chirp.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, the topic for today on our last podcast of the season is to bring our series on creation care to a close. The theme, we're doing this parallel series with Spirit and Truth. And so their theme for today, they're on the last day of Genesis 1. And so it's about Sabbath. And they have framed that as care for ourselves. We're sort of, we're sort of tangential to that. We're on the Sabbathy theme or I don't know exactly what we are, but we're in Ezekiel 47. That's where we are.
That's where we are.
And we're thinking about, God's presence in creation or something like that. I don't know exactly how it connects, but trust me, it does connect.
Mm-hmm. I do trust you.
We will know by the end how it has connected.
Yeah, I like that.
I hope so.
I like the mystery.
Ezekiel 47 is not necessarily your go-to text, although it is a really lovely text. And I think of the texts in Ezekiel, I think it's a fairly well-known Ezekiel text.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I don't know how well-known Ezekiel is.
Yeah, it's not something you usually like crochet verses from Ezekiel on your little like pillows.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My favorite Ezekiel reference is that Ezekiel 4:9 bread that you see in the grocery store. Do you know this bread?
Oh, I know that bread. I actually it's good bread, but it's
good bread.
Hysterical to me that it is called Ezekiel, that it references Ezekiel 4:9.
Yeah. Because, Ezekiel 4:9 gives you a recipe for bread. And this is what Ezekiel is supposed to eat whilst lying on his side as a prophetic sign to Israel, made of wheat and barley, beans and lentils, millet and spelt. Put them in a bowl and make your bread from them. Delicious.
But Bobby, how shall we bake the bread?
We shall. If you are wondering that, then you can skip down to Ezekiel 4:12, eat it like barley bread, and bake it on human excrement while they watch.
Yum.
Yeah, they don't say that part
Poop
on the
bread.
bread. Yeah,
They
poop
don't.
bread.
No. Well, Ezekiel complains about that, and then finally the leniency given to him is that he can cook it over animal feces instead of human feces.
Then
That's
I'll let
why
you
the bread
use
cracks
cow
me up.
dung instead of human excrement. Mm-hmm.
Thank you,
Yeah.
thank you. Oh, thank you.
I guess this is why it's Ezekiel 4:9 bread and then not Ezekiel 4:9 to 13 bread.
Okay, that's true. Mm-hmm.
You're just not supposed to read past there. Anyway, there's
Don't
more
read
to
past
Ezekiel than just poop bread, although that is one of the best parts of Ezekiel in my own understanding of Ezekiel.
Uh-huh.
So I don't know how much, we're going to need a little framework, I think, to make sense of what's happening in Ezekiel 47. Today's text is Ezekiel 47, 1 through 12, right at the very end of the book of Ezekiel, which ends in the next chapter. So a whole lot has happened in Ezekiel. Can you give us some sort of orientation to Ezekiel to give us someplace to start?
Like a quick, here's my attempt at a quick orientation toward Ezekiel. So, like many of the prophets, Ezekiel is wrestling with the question of why the exile happened, why the temple was destroyed, what went wrong. Because it really was quite wrong.
And he himself was writing from the exile, is that right? He was in Babylon? Yeah.
Yeah.
So he knew the exile well, yes.
He knew the exile well and was really feeling all of the possible sufferings of it, including a lot of psychological distress. The focus of his answer to this question, what went wrong, is related to the ritual world. He has this idea that people turned their back on God and they ceased to distinguish between what was holy and what was profane. In a way that reminds me a little bit of, we were talking last week about these boundaries that God has put in place in the natural world that people started to ignore. Ezekiel is sort of suggesting a similar thing, but in the ritual world.
Right.
And so because of that, just like when we don't observe boundaries in the natural world, it becomes uninhabitable for creatures. The temple becomes uninhabitable for God, and so God leaves the temple, and Ezekiel is basically losing his mind about it. He is deeply distressed, and he has very distressing visions, and overall it is a fairly distressing book. But all of that said, we're here at the end, as you said, within this section, chapters 40 to 48 at the end, where he's having a pretty positive vision of the future.
Yes.
And he's being shown a future temple by, it seems like, some kind of angelic being, down to all of its details, and is really being taken on a tour of this space. And the idea is that this temple, to help keep the boundaries that are needed, that we did not hold before, is a little bit further out of town than the temples that we have known, the first temple and the second temple. It has a lot of walls and boundaries. But as we will see from this chapter, there for sure are ways in which it is connected to the human community that surrounds it.
That was a really lovely introduction.
What did I miss?
Well, I was going to, all of that is exactly right. The connection that I was seeing in the flow of the series is in Leviticus 26, as we were talking about last time. God says, if you're not able to observe my statutes and commands, then you're going to go into exile, basically. And so then this is exactly what has happened. And so they've gone into the exile. Leviticus had this sort of vision at the end in those last few verses that we read last time about, but if you return to my statutes, then the world will be transformed. And so this is not exactly an extension of Leviticus 26, but they're sort of related in that this Ezekiel 47 is kind of a vision of what that will be like. The other thing, and you alluded to this, is that in Ezekiel, in chapter 10, God appears in this, I call it the divine Pope mobile. It's like, you see it in Ezekiel 1, it's like these angels with four faces, and they have wheels, and they're like rolling around, and on top is
like
God's
eyes
throne.
On the wheels.
Yeah, there's eyes every place.
It's really weird.
They can move without turning their heads. They can see everywhere at once. And so you've got a wheeled God. or a God on a wheeled throne, I guess is really what it is.
Mm-hmm.
In Ezekiel 10, there's this image of God on a wheeled throne. And at the end of that chapter, the throne rises up out of the temple and wheels off into the distance. And so God has abandoned the temple. And so then this is like part of the reason for the destruction of Jerusalem is because God has abandoned the temple. Well, in Ezekiel 43, which is the beginning of this vision, God wheels back in to the temple and resettles. And so this chapter that we're reading in 47 is not only envisioning a new temple, but also that the glory of the Lord has returned to the temple in Jerusalem on the wheeled throne. And God has come back. And so that's part of this background.
Yeah.
All right, so we're just 12 verses today. And so I'm going to read, I think I'm just going to read the first half of it-ish, starting in 47:1. I'm reading in the Common English Bible. Oh, there's a he right here in 47:1. The he is this sort of angelic messenger who's been showing Ezekiel around. They've been measuring the various walls and gates and all of those kinds of things of the new temple. So he's like the angelic tour guide or contractor or something like that, showing Ezekiel the temple. When he brought me back to the temple's entrance, I noticed that water was flowing toward the east from under the temple's threshold. The temple faced east. The water was going out from under the temple's facade toward the south of the altar. He led me out through the north gate and around the outside to the outer east gate, where the water flowed out under the facade on the south side. With the line in his hand, the man went out toward the east. When he measured off 1,500 feet, he made me cross the water. It was ankle deep. He measured off another 1,500 feet and made me cross the water. It was knee deep. He measured off another 1,500 feet and made me cross the water, and it was waist high. When he measured off another 1,500 feet, it had become a river that I couldn't cross. The water was high, deep enough for swimming, but too high to cross. He said to me, "Human one, do you see?" So, Amy, this is going to be a very simple-minded question, but there's water in the temple. That wasn't even a question. Like, that just seems, just the starting point, the very premise here is unusual. Like, all of us, we're already thinking something's going on here. Can you just orient me a little bit to, like, how do we think about water in the temple?
Yeah. No, if we had like water flowing up from underneath my synagogue, we would not be so happy about that.
We would not, yeah. This idyllic paradisical future in which there is a roof leak or something. What's going on?
You know, we talked in the early creation stories and then again in some of the Psalms about this idea that there's some kind of pre-existing waters in creation, the Tehom, the deep waters that can be a source of chaos. And we talked about a lot of sort of moving around of the waters and boundaries set for the waters. There is also a tradition that some fundamental aspect of this like chaotic water is shoved into the center of the earth. And then sort of like when you have like too much chaos in your house and you shove it all in the closet and then like maybe for good measure you like block the door with something so the door can't pop open again. The temple's built on top of where that water is because it's heavy. No, not because it's heavy. You know, but like there's this idea that in order to, I don't know, that somehow God's presence on earth keeps the dangerous side of water, the chaotic side of water at bay. And so it's really interesting here for me to read this and see, at least, you know, so far, and this sort of a spoiler alert, this water is not coming out of the earth to destroy things. It is not coming out as the temple couldn't hold it back and it is going to destroy the world. It's coming out in this little, you know, first it's kind of a trickle and it's ankle deep, and then it gets stronger and stronger sort of the further you follow it down. But I can't disconnect it in my mind from the idea of these primordial waters that are shoved down in there.
I really love that image, Amy, of like the temple is like the regulator on the spigot of Tahom or something. That was a terrible analogy, but you know what I'm saying? Like you've got this like this water that could be chaotic, and the temple is what holds it back. The other image that was occurring to me is in that Garden of Eden text in Genesis 2. Yes. There's always that, every time I read that text, especially, I remember you and I did this when we talked about it on the podcast at one point anyway. There's that section with all the rivers, and I'm always like, I don't know what to do with this river section. Like, can we just move on? Mm-hmm. But there is this stream that trickles up in the Garden of Eden, and it brings life to the garden, and it divides into the 4 rivers that feed the earth. And so if you take those 2 images together, the one you're talking about, the sealing off the Tahom, and then that Garden of Eden text, so then it's like the temple is allowing that life-giving water of Eden to come forth. So it's quelled the chaotic Tahom. It has bubbled up. And so now we're back in the sort of Garden of Eden realm.
I love that connection to Eden, Bobby, and I love it. I love thinking about it in the context of this sort of return from exile, return of God's presence in this place. And even in terms of thinking about the way that Ezekiel thinks about it, which is really that like the people aren't in Eden at this point.
Right.
But the source of life still springs from there and flows out of it.
Yes. So then when we're thinking about creation, I think that like now we're in a text of like recreation or a retelling or a recreating of the original creation. And here we are post-exile with a sort of a new Eden and a new river and this new life-giving source. And it's the same story, but it's transformed in some really crucial ways.
Yeah.
So, though, there's a couple things about the water. The first, like, we have a little bit of this story while the water is just in the temple. And it's a little bit confusing. Like, it's flowing to the east. And it reminds us that the temple faced east. But then things keep going kind of to the south, like the south of the altar and things like that.
And then he's let out for the northern gate. And
then he's got to walk around the outside of the building or something like that. Yeah. I don't know for sure that all those directions are super important, but is there anything in the directionality of this that you think is worth us pulling out?
I mean, I think what I find moving in it is just, and this is just persistent through the book of Ezekiel, this kind of like attention to detail and like physical detail. Like there's a real, you have to picture that you're actually in this place and how would this work? So a couple of chapters earlier in Ezekiel 43 and then again 44, just at the beginning, it tells us, as you said, that God comes back, God's presence comes back into the temple, and God's presence comes through the eastern gate, which is the main gate. That's the main entrance. Once God's presence has used that gate, the doors are to be closed. Like we can't, nothing else is supposed to be, God has God's own entrance.
Yes.
A private elevator. Nothing else should be coming in and out of that gate. So the way I understand it is then that even the water doesn't go out that gate. So the water comes out the south side and sort of goes around. And then Ezekiel himself can't go out the east gate. And there's water going out the south gate. So he goes out the north gate.
Got you.
And kind of walks around. I mean, I think it's an interesting detail. I don't know.
No, I love that. Yeah. So the ultimate goal is to be headed eastward, but we can't immediately head eastward because that gate is sealed. So everybody's taking like the alternate routes to get outside the temple. Yeah. And then starting in verse 3, then we just head eastward once we get outside the temple. But before that, we're paying respect to the like holiness of the temple precinct.
I think so. Yeah, they're really, again, Ezekiel likes to have each thing in its place and not all bumping into each other. So the water has its way of going and Ezekiel has his way of going and neither of them are the way that God comes and goes. But they all do wind up going in the same direction.
So like we'll meet up outside on the other side of the sealed east gate, and then we'll head off together. Yeah. That's so fascinating. Now, you alluded to this a little bit earlier. When the man's got like a measuring line, and he's headed out to the east. He goes 1,500 feet, and then it's ankle deep. 1,500 more feet, and it's, what is it, knee deep. 1,500 more feet, waist deep. So as we move away from the temple, the water is getting deeper.
Yeah.
So first of all, I just want to get that image clear. And then another 1,500 feet, it's so deep that it's like now it's a swimming hole.
Yeah, you just can't cross it.
You can't cross it. And so this like increasing depth of water, which starts as a trickle coming from under the altar.
Yeah.
And then by the time you get a mile or so outside of Jerusalem, it is it's like the Mississippi River.
Yeah.
That's just, I mean, that image is so interesting.
It's really interesting and strange because it's like the further you get from the source, the deeper it gets.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it's like the Mississippi. You know, the Mississippi is really mighty, but it starts in Minnesota at a place that you could like walk across with 5 steps down. There's a little Indigo Girls reference.
You got to sing it, Bobby. You got to sing it.
I don't know, were the Indigo Girls singing about the Ezekiel River?
mean, if anyone's going to sing about it, it would be the Indigo Girls.
That's true.
They
Emily
know a lot of
Saliers,
stuff.
she has a theological education.
Yeah.
Or at least her dad was super theological. I don't know.
I mean, I love the image both because, you know, it's true to life, this sort of deepening of the water. And also I love it metaphorically that the source seems small at first.
Yeah.
But somehow it turns into this gushing river.
Yeah.
That's quite powerful.
Yeah. The difference in the Ezekiel Temple River, I mean, I was going to say the difference. My spouse worked with a guy who one time said, the only difference between humans and dolphins is that humans have an opposable thumb.
Oh.
And she was like, really? Is that the only difference? I think what he meant was like dolphins are super smart and like, you know,
yes.
but
yes.
like, so I was about to say the only difference between the
overstated.
Mississippi and the Ezekiel Temple River, but it was not the only difference, but one difference is
yes.
the reason that the Mississippi starts out as a trickle in Minnesota and ends up as an enormous river by the time you get where I am, is that there's lots of tributaries feeding it.
Right.
But with the Ezekiel River coming out of the temple, there's not any tributaries feeding it. And so it's kind of a miracle that it's getting bigger. So I like that where you're headed with the metaphorical reading. Because I mean, I think we are invited to read this river metaphorically, that what appears at first to be sort of inconsequential turns in of its own accord to this amazing deep river by the time it gets just a few thousand feet outside of the city.
Yeah.
Amy, we're going to find out a little bit more later in this text, but headed east out of Jerusalem, we're headed toward the Dead Sea, the river valley.
Yeah, I think that's where we're headed. Yeah, this really, deserty area. And then, the Dead Sea, of course, it's so funny because I think of it now as this like tourist destination where you go to enjoy all the minerals and float in the water and all of that. And it is not a sea that supports life, thus the name the Dead Sea.
Yes.
It's so salty, but that's where this stream is heading.
I'm assuming you've been in the Dead Sea on your many journeys. Have you been in the Dead Sea?
I have been in the Dead Sea only once. I think I was allergic to it.
Oh no.
I did not enjoy the minerals of the Dead Seas. I don't know.
I went to the Dead Sea on a trip many years ago, and the day before, maybe the morning of,
oh no,
we
did
had
you
been
cut yourself?
Well, we had been on a camel excursion up Jebel Musa, the traditional Mount Sinai. So I've been riding a camel, and I got like a camel saddle sore. And then I got in the Dead Sea with all of its saltiness. It was a little painful, but I think it was actually quite, ironically, quite healing of my saddle sore. Anyway, but it's pretty cool because you just like float in there. But that's not the point. That's not
it's
the point.
not cool because it cannot support life. Okay.
So the question that the angelic tour guide poses to Ezekiel is, human one, do you see?
Mm-hmm.
Which I mean, like, yeah, I see. Like, there's a big old river. Like, you've been making me walk across it. So it seems like the angel's question means more than just, like, can you see that there's a river in front of you?
Yeah.
What do you think? I mean, we'll know more as we continue on with the text, but if you're Ezekiel and the angel poses this question, do you see? What do you think you're supposed to have seen?
That is such a good question. And there's such a sort of, visual immediacy about it's a vision, right? So there's a
Right.
visual immediacy about this, but you're right. It's not explained as like the meaning of this is whatever. I think that what I see, at least, is that there is this elaborate, beautiful temple structure that is being created outside of Jerusalem. And now there's this, it's flowing into Jerusalem somehow. Like it's flowing into the land through this water. Like somehow there is something about there's something about the temple that is flowing from the temple to the people.
Yes.
And I don't know much more about, we don't know much more about it at this point.
At this moment, yeah.
In the text. But, there are many, many, many metaphors for God and godliness in the world. And certainly one of them is water, sort of the divine flow through creation. And that's how I'm seeing it. That fine, you saw God enter this space to be especially present in the temple. But you can see that even though Ezekiel's not inviting, Joe Israel to go visit the temple, it's not that it's totally disconnected. There is some flow between them.
I love the way that you said that. And, often when I think about the Jerusalem temple, I think of the flow of people toward the temple.
Yeah.
So we're talking about the pilgrimage festivals and things like that. Like you come to the temple to worship God.
That's right.
And so it's a human flow in the other direction. And so you can sort of start to think of the temple or the worshiping space as like the destination.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And here it's the source.
It's the source
of a flow of another kind that's going out. I love the way you said that, out to the people, out into the land.
Mm-hmm.
And if you've been in that part of Israel, east, I mean, you don't have to go too far east of Jerusalem before you start, you head down the mountain and then you're in the sort of the Dead Sea region fairly quickly, which is a fairly desolate area. And so you've got this river flowing toward the desolate parts of the land.
And it's not, I said flowing to the people, which is true, but it's also, it's water flowing out to the desert. We've been focused on creation, not just on people. And this, it's a bigger thing that's happening.
Yeah. We've been talking about water, we were only supposed to talk about it the one day, I think, but we've been talking about it.
There's a lot.
Yeah. This is reminding me a little bit of that sort of Psalm 65, where and also in Psalm 104, where the water arriving is like a herald of the transformation of things.
Yes.
And once there's a stream coming from God, then you start to think, life is about to get moving.
Life is possible. Mm-hmm.
All right, then I'll pick up I'm in the middle of verse 6. Then he led me back to the edge of the river. When I went back, I saw very many trees on both banks of the river. He said to me, "These waters go out to the eastern region, flow down the steep slopes, and go into the Dead Sea. When the flowing waters enter the sea, the water becomes fresh. Wherever the water flows, every living thing that moves will thrive. There will be great schools of fish, because when these waters enter the sea, it will be fresh. Wherever the river flows, everything will live. People will stand fishing beside it from En-Gedi to En-Eglaim, and it will become a place for spreading nets. It will be like the Mediterranean Sea, having all kinds of fish in it. Its marshes and swamps won't be made fresh. They are left for salt. But on both banks of the river will grow up all kinds of fruit-bearing trees. Their leaves won't wither, and their fruitfulness won't wane. They will produce fruit in every month, because their water comes from the sanctuary. Their fruit will be for eating, their leaves for healing."
It is so much like the imagery from those Psalms and other Psalms too. Like
Yeah.
this, all the life that springs up around the water, starting with the trees.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Yeah.
This is interesting. You start with the trees and you sort of think you know where we're headed, like with the birds and like you're sort of back in Psalm 104. But turns out that's not where we're headed, at least at the beginning. We get the trees. And so I guess this is just an image of like this water is bringing life, right? But almost immediately we move to down the slopes into the Dead Sea, and we get this sort of transformation of the Dead Sea. Can you just talk about why, like, what is the significance? Like now the Dead Sea, which has no life in it, which is why it's called the Dead Sea, suddenly teeming with fish and people out with their fishing boats, like they're water skiing on the lake, they're doing the whole thing. Like, why is that the vision, do you think?
I mean, it just seems like such a, I can't think of the right adjective, but it's such a turnaround. Like it's such a miraculous shift from what has been. There's this known body of water that, in the desert, you can imagine if there's a body of water that doesn't support life, it's a little frustrating.
Yeah.
And to imagine that that can change.
Yes.
And, relatively quickly, once this water starts flowing, it seems, really feels like it feels like a miracle. Like it feels like such a complete turnaround from what has been. It feels different to me than just saying that the water will, nourish whatever is nearby it and, trees will start growing. But to name a space where that is precisely not happening and saying it can transform even this incredibly brackish water, it just underscores the turnaround, I guess.
Yeah. The image of trees growing in the wilderness is dramatic enough, but we've seen it so often by now that you're a little bit like, yeah, trees in the wilderness, that's nice. And so this thing that you're talking about the Dead Sea is like one of the most lifeless places you can imagine. And I had not thought about it that way, but yeah, the frustrating, like we've got a huge lake right here and it will not support life. And so the transformation of that sort of mark of deadness into a place where life is fully happening is really powerful. That line in verse 9 about where the river flows, every living thing that moves will thrive, like that just reminds me of that Genesis 1 text with all the living things that emerge in the sea.
Yes.
And then also
and my translation actually has every living creature that swarms.
Oh,
so
yeah.
It really sounds like that moment in creation where the swarming things are created.
Yeah.
And first you need the swarming things before there are fish, because the fish often eat the swarming things, I guess. I don't really know how that...
Yeah. I don't really know what a swarming thing is, actually. Is that like plankton?
I don't think I want to be near the swarming things.
Yeah.
But the fish can eat them. That's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then life just sort of builds up from that maybe I shouldn't say most simple form, but from that form that we see earlier in the creation story to fish and then to fishermen.
Yeah. So we get the water that flows, that transforms, the sea that feeds the fish, that feeds the people, and now you've got thriving one already of all sorts of life, including human life.
Yeah.
The image of the swarming things, the reference back to Genesis 1, like you can hear now, we've seen a couple times the echoes of the Genesis 1 creation story, the Garden of Eden creation story. Like this text is self-consciously retelling creation.
Yes.
As if this is a new act of creation or
yes.
recreation or however we want to think about it.
In this place that has been known for not having life in it at all.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. So just as God brought habitable world out of tohu vavohu in Genesis 1, here God is able to bring life to a lifeless region with water flowing from the temple.
Yeah.
The references there to En-Gedi and En-Eglaim, I'm assuming that that's just talking about like a broad region. Like it's not just like a little isolated spot.
Yeah, that is how I read that, but I will admit I did not dig deep into that.
And part of the issue is that nobody really knows what Eneglaim really is a reference to.
Mm-hmm.
En-Gedi is sort of on the western bank of the Dead Sea.
Mm-hmm.
And so people have identified Eneglaim as sort of on the southeastern bank of the Dead Sea, in which case we're talking about like the whole region surrounding the Dead Sea. I don't know that there's super a lot in there, but people standing, fishing all around the Dead Sea seems to be the image. It becomes like the Mediterranean, which it, is like life in that part of the world. Like the Mediterranean was the source of civilization.
Yeah.
And so like for the Dead Sea to be like that, like it's
pretty amazing.
That's pretty amazing. You get this little, in the CEB, it's a little parenthetical. You get this note, its marshes and swamps won't be made fresh. They're left for salt.
Yeah.
So we've got this transformation, but we're going to leave a little bit of the saltiness and marshiness.
Yeah.
Thoughts about what that's about?
I think that part is so interesting, Bobby. And I kind of go back and forth between two different ideas that I guess I could stitch together in some way. But one of them is that salt is also needed.
Yeah.
So that's true. And then the other one is that, like, I don't know quite how to say this. Like, not all of the blessings will be felt everywhere. Like there is some spaces are for this and some spaces are for this. And so like you can't really stand in one place and think that you have the whole picture. I don't know if the marshy places are meant to represent something bad or just something different.
Yeah. Yeah. I read them as something different.
Yeah.
And the only way in which they are bad is if everything is salty.
Yeah.
That's not good.
Yeah.
But in a sense, everything being not salty is also not good.
Yeah.
So you need the marshy region. It's like we've been talking about with the various ways in which the sea has been confined in our earlier texts.
Mm-hmm.
There's a place for the salt marsh,
mm-hmm.
but we don't want everything to be a salt marsh.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that reference that you were making to salt has value. It's a preservative. It's a spice. I think it has some ritual. It's delicious. It has some ritual purposes, I think.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That you need the salt, and so we don't want like this river is not about destroying the things that have value of their own accord. It's about bringing life in the dead spaces, and so it's going to acknowledge and preserve the value of what is already there.
Mm-hmm.
So after this little foray through the sea, we come back to the trees. So we kind of noticed the trees, and then we went straight to the Dead Sea, and then now we're coming back.
Yes.
We learn more about the trees now. They're fruit bearing.
So much fruit.
So much fruit. Every month, like they're just year round bearing fruit. They never have a dead season. Their leaves stay green all year. I mean, there's just this image of plenty.
Yeah, again, it's a kind of miraculous image of plenty, because I don't think there are any trees that bear fruit all year. And it goes back to this very sort of Eden-like image to me. Although we've already had fishermen, so presumably they're not fishing for sport. They're eating the fish.
Yeah.
But then I like how it gives us fruit after that. Like it's almost moving further and further toward Eden in some ways. Like it ends in this place where there's so much fruit in the trees that actually if you just wanted to eat the fruit on the trees, that would be enough.
Yeah, that image of the fruit-bearing trees that are good for eating, like that just sounds like Genesis 2.
Totally.
And so now we've sort of, like a little bit ago, we were talking about like the Mount Zion is sort of Edenic. Mm-hmm. Now Mount Zion has produced a river that produces like in the most dead areas of Israel. Now that's Edenic too. So this like Eden is like spreading out down this river.
I love that. It reminds me of the way we talked about the initial creation story in Genesis, where sort of, God has this act of creation, but then tells the earth to continue to create. Like this it spreads. Like this is meant to spread.
Yes.
And now Eden itself is spreading.
Yes. These trees don't only produce fruit, but also they have leaves that are for healing.
Yeah.
Can you just that sort of medicinal nature of those trees is really interesting. Do you have thoughts about that?
I guess a couple things. I mean, first of all, this, as far as I have read, this is the only place that we encounter that word in the Hebrew Bible. I think the presence of like healing power, I guess it makes me think about a lot of things, but one of them is that there is knowledge of sickness in this Eden. There is a need for healing in this version of Eden, and also capacity for healing that the natural world itself offers to you. And I don't know if I would have imagined that in the first iteration of Eden, that people could need healing.
Oh, I love that, Amy. Because, I was thinking there's two things that are sort of missing if you think about this as Eden, and they're the two main trees, the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So I think the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, like that ship has sort of sailed by now, right? Like, so you don't need it anymore because that humans have that insight or power or whatever. You don't have the tree of life anymore, which to me is my understanding in the Garden of Eden was about if you continue to eat from the tree of life, then you will essentially be immortal. And so, and you're right, I think there was no sickness or illness in the Garden of Eden in that sense. So now you no longer have that, but you have the closest thing to it, which is the tree of healing, which acknowledges that there is sickness and illness, and there's not immortality, but there is a healing presence that sort of is a balm or a curative.
And that is woven into the natural world, that maybe there still will be stories of miraculous healing that seem to occur outside the natural world as we know it, but also just baked into these trees. There is that capacity.
At the end of Leviticus 26 and then at the beginning of the book of Ezekiel, we were in this sort of desolate, everything is destroyed, there is no real future. There was like a promise at the end of Leviticus 26, but it seemed a little fragile. And now here we are with this vision of the world, or at least the region of Israel east of Jerusalem, being transformed from a space of deathliness to a space of abundant, ongoing life and healing. The text reminds us in verse 12, the reason that they produce in every month is because their water comes from the sanctuary. So it reminds us there in this sort of bracket. We started out in the sanctuary. We end up with a reminder that all of this comes from the sanctuary. So somehow this transformation of creation is being framed within the presence of God in the temple. Can you talk a little bit about how you think about that?
I'm glad you pointed that out. And my first thought reading it was like, oh, well, that's why they can produce every month, because trees don't really produce every month. And that's true. And I feel kind of invited back again. This series has invited me so many times into this, but to really reflect on just the miracle of the fact that fruits grow on trees at all, that we can eat, and to sort of imagine the godliness, the flow of God through that whole system, through that whole process. Like, okay, yes, this is, sort of like all, especially so because these particular waters are flowing directly from the temple. And so the trees have a particular, insanely prolific growth pattern about them. But even if it was more limited than that, I think I don't know. The whole thing feels pretty miraculous in this context, even though it happens around me all the time on a slightly smaller scale.
Yeah, that's lovely.
Do you have a different thought about that?
I mean, to me, I think that's really beautiful. God is sort of at the center of all of the things, and life is an ongoing miracle. And the problem that we had in Leviticus 26 is that we forgot that that is true.
Yes.
And so we started living in ways contradictory to the presence of God in the world, and that resulted in deathliness. And so this text recenters God. God has taken up residence again in the temple, and the river is flowing out from there, and that is the source of life in the world. And here it's like a extra miraculous, but it's always been true from the perspective of these texts that God is the source of life in the world. And this text is reminding us and recentering us about that. I think that's exactly right. Amy, this text ends with the transformation of the Dead Sea. And so there's a big old part of me that wants to read this in light of Genesis 2, that this river that emerges from the temple divides into the 4 rivers that feed the world, and that this becomes transformation of the world. The way it's told in Ezekiel is it goes to the eastern border of Israel, basically. And that's as far as we know. Do you have thoughts about whether you think, or I don't know if it's whether you think Ezekiel was, or whether we should read Ezekiel as talking about the near transformation of the people, or the sort of far transformation of the world? Can we extend Ezekiel's river past the Dead Sea, I guess is my question. Or do you think he could envision that?
I kind of think both things. I think that the specificity of the way this story is told is important because Ezekiel himself just seems so incredibly tied into the particularities of the people Israel and Jerusalem and the story of God as he knows it and the temple, and sort of like Ezekiel is not a sort of generalist. He is really a particularist.
Yes.
And I think there's a lot of beauty in that. And I think that sometimes when we expand beyond what the human mind can reasonably comprehend, that we lose something.
Yes.
I think there's something real about thinking about what you can touch. What is the land that you know? And how can you picture that land shifting? But I don't think that excludes in any way the idea that this is sort of an example. Like, you have to tell this story in its particularities in order for it to be meaningful, because it's trying to speak to what will happen to this particular land. And then we can also think about other particular lands. But we're encouraged to think about the place we know. Like, think about the place where our feet are on the ground and imagine the transformation of that place instead of letting it become totally abstract.
I really love that, Amy. And you had mentioned in the beginning of the podcast that Ezekiel himself had experienced trauma. He seems to have been somebody who was actually in the land of Israel when the Babylonians deported people to Babylon. So he has experienced a forced migration away from his home. And so he is a person who has experienced trauma, talking to people who have experienced trauma. And so the message, like, you are going to be okay, is a really important message, beyond which is everything is going to be okay. But what you need to hear first is that you are going to be okay. And I think you're right. Ezekiel sort of ends there. Doesn't necessarily mean that he precludes the next step, but he's wanting to talk about the ones close to him and that they have a future.
Yeah. You know, Bobby, this section, and this is pushing the bounds of our reading a little bit, but I just have to mention what happens in this section right after this.
Yeah.
This conversation about particularity versus more universalism, and also our conversation from Leviticus 26 makes it feel so important. So after this part, they start talking about the division of the land into different, territories, the redivision of it. So before, the land of Israel has been divided into tribal territories, and each of the tribes of Israel had their land, and that was, their inheritance. They could farm the land. They could, that was their sort of livelihood, really. And there was a recognition that there were people who lived among them who were not of the people Israel. And there's this constant reminder to Israel, like, be good to those people. Be good to they're often called the strangers, the sojourners, the people who are among you who are not Israel. And all of that is well and good. And part of the reason you have to be so good to them is that they're like the endemic poor. They don't have a way to care for themselves because they don't have land.
Yes.
And so what happens at the end of this chapter is the land is redivided, and those people are included in the redivision of the land. And I just am finding it so moving, both in terms of thinking about, like, it is still particular. We're still talking about this particular land, right? We're still talking about the particular people who are living on that land. But there is a willingness to move beyond, the systems that were in play before to make it work better. Like, the system can naturally support more people more easily if we would be willing to shift it.
Yes.
And I also love the thought that this expansion of Edenicness, and the sort of regrowth in the land would sort of lead, it seems like, pretty naturally to the redivision of resources among
I love that.
the people who are there. It should.
Yeah. I love that, Amy. Thanks for pressing us a little bit into the second half of the chapter. I just stopped reading at verse 12 because that's where, I don't know, I always stop reading. Because land divisions are kind of mind-numbing to me.
But that's mind-numbing, yeah.
But that's such a beautiful insight from that redistribution of the bounty. Well, Amy, you've started pointing us already in some really beautiful directions. This text is the culmination of our series on creation for the summer.
Yeah.
So thinking about this text as itself and what it might say to our communities, and or thinking about it as the conclusion of this particular series of texts that we've been reading for the last 6 weeks, are there things that you want to make sure to draw our attention to or pull out for us as people of faith?
I think the last episode, I sort of ended by saying, like, okay, what am I supposed to do with this? Like, yes, I see it. Thanks for showing it to me. But what am I supposed to do? I'm one person who lives within a system in a city, and I don't have a lot of skill sets, and I don't, like, what do I do? What do I do when I wake up in the morning? And for some reason, this text and its emphasis, it many times it talks about sort of the banks of the river. And, the trees along the banks of the river. It just uses the word a lot. Sfat or Sifataim are the two banks. And those are also the word for, that is also the word for lips in Hebrew. And so where I am sort of landing at this moment is, one of the things I need to do is to talk about all of this learning, to talk about it, to talk about the beauty of creation and the possibilities of its abundance, and to do what small parts of it I can do myself. But I think that I have often sort of shied away from it because it's so big and overwhelming and scary, and because I don't want to make people feel bad or ashamed, and I don't want to enter into, surprise conflicts with people over how we think the environment might need to be treated. But I really think after this series, I feel so strongly that the potential in creation and the loss that is happening and that I am participating in. And so I'm almost thinking about it the way that I have heard you talk before about the way that Christians are called upon to talk about Jesus. Like, you have to talk about it. You can't just quietly think it yourself. You have to talk about it. And I'm feeling like I have to talk about it. I have to let the stream of this Torah come from my lips all the time. And I don't know what that will look like, but that's the pull that I feel from having done this series of texts with you.
I like that way you phrase that, of the stream of Torah coming from my lips all of the time. Like, that's such a beautiful summation of this text, but also of what we've been doing. And, this text, the transformation that takes place in this text of places of deathliness, like the Dead Sea, into places of abundant life that can be shared, emerges from the temple. Like God is its source. And one can read that as like, then we should wait around for God to show up and transform the world. But the way that you're thinking about that as like, we can become springs of Torah into the world, like the way God enters into the world most directly is through communities of faith, like yours and like mine, where what we are doing is calling to mind all of these, like every text we've read has been about how God is at the center of creation and there is an order which has been created that is good and bountiful, and we have been taught how to live in it in ways that protect its goodness and bounty shared among everybody. And in Leviticus 26, when we get off kilter about the place of God relative to our own place, that's when things go horribly awry. And there's lots of necessary solutions, but one of them absolutely is reminding ourselves first that God is in fact at the center of the transformation of creation. And so exactly talking about that and reshaping the imaginations of people of faith to think about the world again as a God-centered place where we are in relationship with a creation that also has its own relationship to God, and which is actually a prior relationship to our relationship to God. And those need to value each other. The other thing that's in this text that's really helpful to me is the trickly nature of the stream at the beginning.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem like much. Like maybe it seems like the roof is leaking a little bit or something. It's just a tiny little bit of water that's flowing out from under the altar. And you think, well, how could that little tiny bit of water ever be anything? And by the time you get a mile outside the temple, it's a mighty river that you can't swim across. Yeah. And we don't know in this text, like there's no explanation for how that happened. And so I think it can be really frustrating. Like you started us out as like, well, what are we supposed to do? Like I'm just one little person, which is true. And we're just in a one little community. But this text also starts with a trickle that seems inconsequential. You would never look at a little trickle of water coming out from under the altar in the temple and think that could turn the Dead Sea into a life-giving place full of fish and fisher people. And so the trickle might be a trickle, but, let's let the trickle loose in the world.
Yes.
In my tradition, this text gets picked up at the very last chapter of the New Testament in Revelation 22, which is a story about heaven come to earth, which is talked about in terms of New Jerusalem arriving. And in that New Jerusalem, there is this river of life and the trees along the banks that are producing in their monthly, like every month of the year, become trees of life, like in the Garden of Eden. And so whatever this text has in mind, the Christian reinterpretation of this text in Revelation really does have in mind the transformation of the world and the Christian community, and in Ezekiel, the Jewish community as sources of life and of healing. And that this is how the world gets transformed. Like God at the center produces the fruits that are life and healing. And so for us to think about like, how can we be that? How can we center God? How can we be source of life for the world? How can we bring healing to the world? How can we raise consciousness about the environment? Those things are crucial for the transformation near to us and also transformation of the world.
That's beautiful, Bobby. May we all be the trickle.
May we be the trickle. I like that.
That's
gonna be my new
weird. And BibleWorm t-shirts that say that.
May we be the trickle. Amy, I've really enjoyed this series. I'm kind of glad we found our way into it.
I'm really grateful. I'm grateful that the folks at Spirit and Truth reached out to us.
Yes.
And suggested this, and I'm really grateful for the range of text we were able to read.
Yeah, me too. So for the rest of the summer, what we'll be doing is just replaying some old, I guess maybe with some old summer series or something like that. Like there will be BibleWorms being posted, but they will be things from earlier times.
Well,
And then
we
you and-
go on to our lives of leisure. over
While we
this
go
winter.
into our lives of leisure. Yeah. We will be back on the podcast in the fall, picking up with the new narrative lectionary year, which is focused on the Gospel of Luke, which picks up right after Labor Day. So the podcast will be back with new episodes sometime end of August, 1st of September.
Alrighty.
In the meantime, I hope that you have a wonderful summer and that all of our folks out there in podcast land
Yeah.
have a wonderful summer.
Yeah. It's been a great season. It's been a pleasure. And I will see you in just a couple months.
All right. Sounds great.
All right.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks for joining us for this week's episode of BibleWorm. If you've enjoyed this free podcast, we hope you'll help us keep it going by joining our Patreon for as little as $4 per month. You can also sign up for other goodies like early access, video lectures, weekly liturgies, and more. Visit patreon.com/BibleWorm podcast for details.
BibleWorm is produced and edited by Bobby Williamson. Our theme song is sung by Colin Bagby, and our theme music is The World at Large by Dano Songs. Many thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping make this podcast possible.
This concludes Season 5 of BibleWorm. We hope you'll join us for the rest of the summer as we replay some of our special series from the past. We'll be back in September with the new narrative lectionary season, beginning with Genesis and making our way through the Gospel of Luke. Until then, keep on digging.